Black patriarch.
So let's talk about wealth, how wealth was distributed and gained in this country. Wealth was gained in America from murdering, from raping, from stealing land for Native Americans, from slavery from African Americans, by dipping in the destroying the bank system like what happened in the Great Depression, by manipulating and destroying currency. That's how wealth was created in what we call white America.
Products that are shipped from federally registered facilities are closely tracked to help ensure that what you buy in a store or restaurant is safe and of the highest quality.
Potentially more than 1,000. Selvage is a much desired old-style heavy-duty denim.
After they're assembled, they go through a test process to make sure they were assembled properly. That includes checking all of the touch capability, every port, and all mechanical functionality on the system.
Human capital is, of course, the capital that's in human beings instead of just machines and things like that.
It's their knowledge, their training, their skills, their life experience.
Any skills or knowledge that makes people more productive.
Hello, my name is Paul Conway and I'm an economist working for the New Zealand Productivity Commission. As you probably gathered from our name, the Commission's work is all about improving the productivity performance of the New Zealand economy. So in this video, I would like to talk about productivity. What is it? Why do we care about it? At a technical level, productivity is just a measure of how much output we produce from a given quantity of inputs. Output divided by inputs.
Supply and demand are the two most important terms in economics. A thorough and solid understanding of these terms is crucial for understanding the markets, economics, and some government policies. So let's go. Demand. Demand are the buyers, or more specifically, demand is the desire and capability of people to purchase things. Supply. Supply are the sellers, or more specifically, supply is the desire and capability of sellers to make things available for purchase. When supply increases, when there's more things for sale, prices will decline until it is low enough to attract more buyers to offset the increase in supply. When demand increases, prices will begin to rise until they've risen high enough to attract more sellers to offset the increase in demand.
Starting in the early 18th century, in the countries of northwestern Europe, a remarkable phenomenon occurred. Economies began to expand and wages to rise. Families who'd never before had any money beyond what they needed just to survive found they could go shopping for small luxuries. Their expenditure created a virtuous economic cycle. The more they spent, the more businesses grew, the more wages rose. By the middle of the 18th century, observers recognized that they were living through a period of epochal change that historians have since described as the world's first consumer revolution. It was in Britain where the changes were most marked. Enormous new industries sprang up to cater for the widespread demand for goods that had once been the preserve of the very rich alone. The only way to generate wealth was to ensure high demand for absurd and unnecessary things. Of course, no one needed embroidered handbags, silk-lined slippers, or ice creams, but it was a blessing that they could be prompted by fashion to want them, for on the back of demand for such trifles, workshops could be built, apprentices trained, and hospitals funded.
It's the day after Thanksgiving, and typically that means sounds like these. Malls across America are teeming with holiday shoppers, buying everything from purses to Pokemon.
I think every year I end up spending more each Christmas, and since I have a few more dollars in the bank, I probably will spend even more this year too.
And lately, American consumers have been shopping with even more vigor than usual.
I think everybody's in a good mood. By the looks of the mall, it looks like it's full of people.
As we approach the once-dreaded date of Y2K, the U.S. economy continues its seemingly inexorable expansion. Thanks to spirited consumer spending, the economy barreled ahead in the third quarter at a growth rate of 5.5%. This pushed the gross domestic product, the total output of goods and services, to $8.9 trillion. The quarter was the best for growth since the end of last year. And today's announcement that personal incomes shot up at the highest rate in 5.5 years comes as the nation's unemployment rate remained near a 30-year low. It now stands at 4.1%. Meanwhile, initial jobless claims fell 13,000 last week, suggesting increased demand for workers.
While President-elect Obama enjoys his Hawaiian vacation, his advisors are working overtime on a massive government spending plan that gets bigger by the day.
There's going to be real significant investment, whether it's $600 billion or more or $700 billion. The clear notion is it's a number no one thought about a year ago.
Sources on Capitol Hill say the stimulus package could grow to $850 billion or more. That's about double the cost in today's dollars of the interstate highway system. It's more than the cost so far of the Iraq War, even more than the entire Vietnam War. The top priority in the Obama plan is big projects that create jobs quickly, rebuilding infrastructure, refurbishing schools, and investing in mass transit, healthcare technology, and green energy.
There's a big void in our economy, and only government can fill it.
With consumers not spending and more businesses laying off workers, some economists say there's simply no alternative.
Now, this is what Republicans, this is what conservatives and budget wonks, this is the holy grail. This is when they say you cut taxes, it explodes the economy. They look at Reagan and what happened in the Reagan years. Ronald Reagan, coming out of tough economic times, cut taxes. And look, you started to see the economy with a little blip here doing better. And then he embarked on not just tax cuts, but tax reform. And that's what's so important here, not just cutting taxes and exploding the deficit, but reforming taxes. And look at what happened. You got 7% growth here, multiple years above 3%. This is what people want when they talk about cutting taxes.
So why would they do it? Well, I'll tell you why. Because there's one school of thought that says money that people don't pay to the government is money that they spend themselves. And when they spend that money, it creates demand. Demand creates jobs. Jobs create consumers who then buy more stuff, and that's how you juice the economy. So Republicans, who are always in favor of tax cuts, basically said, extend the tax cuts to everyone, and it'll goose the economy.
So a market is any place where buyers and sellers meet to exchange goods and services. The key to markets is the concept of voluntary exchange. That is that buyers and sellers willingly decide to make a transaction.
So if farmers produce like too many strawberries, then the price will fall as sellers try to sell them off. Lower prices means less profit to strawberry farmers, and those farmers will have an incentive to produce something else. So if farmers don't produce enough strawberries, buyers will bid up the price, and the farmers will have an incentive to produce more.
In fact, the prices for all sorts of stuff change all the time. External forces can shift both the supply and demand curves. I know it seems complicated at first, but there are really only 4 things that can happen in a market. Supply can decrease, supply can increase, demand can decrease, or demand can increase.
Let's assume you live in a small town where nobody sells bananas. In other words, zero supply. Now, let's also assume that the people who live there would love to eat bananas. In other words, there's a decent demand for bananas. As we can see, there is currently an imbalance. People want bananas, but there are no sellers. Peter understands this and starts selling bananas. At the beginning, his profits will be huge because lots of people want bananas, and he's the only one who has them. The more people start selling bananas, the more supply there will be. If too many people end up selling bananas, but the demand doesn't increase as well, there will be too much supply and some of them will go out of business. Eventually, some kind of a balance tends to be reached.
Tariffs, also known as duties, are taxes that are placed on imports and exports out of a country. Unlike a sales tax, tariff rates are often different for every good. Some goods face high tariffs, while others face low tariffs. Tariffs, along with other applicable fees, are collected during customs clearance and serve several different functions. They are used to generate income for the federal government, protect domestic businesses, protect domestic technology, and also protect growing industries. By levying tariffs, it raises the prices of foreign goods and makes it harder for foreign companies to penetrate the domestic market. Tariffs are sometimes detrimental to the global economy because it inhibits free trade and may decrease innovation if an industry is overprotected. But if employed correctly, they can help protect a nation and its economy.
Dr. Watkins, after World War II, the Japanese were totally decimated, impoverished, because almost all their industries got wiped out. They had nothing. They were a dependent nation after World War II. But in 20 years, between 1945 and 1965, they went from a dependent, powerless, poor, poverty-stricken nation. They became a superpower on the earth. You know why? They started practicing those same power-nomics principles that you started talking about. They set up a system called Kairitsu, which means have a closed circles for economic development and use it. The Chinese do the same thing. Buy from your own people. And therefore, they put up barriers to stop Americans from selling any products into Japan and into China. Now we went up trade missions to China back in the 1960s. They weren't going to let you into their country trying to penetrate their system. They would put up all kind of barriers and restrictions.
Now, a non-tariff barrier
can be a few things. First, it can be as extreme as an embargo. An embargo is an outright ban on all imports. The United States maintains economic sanctions on Iran, for instance, which includes a ban on their exports entering the United States. Second, it could be a quota or a quantitative restriction. An import quota is a rule that says only a certain amount of product X from country Y can enter a country during a certain period of time. Here's an example. Recently, South Korea agreed to a limit on steel exports to the United States. Today, South Korean exporters can export steel to their customers here in the U.S. until they bump up against their quota. Then no more steel from South Korea can enter to the United States.
International trade is the lifeblood of the global economy. Basically, when a good or service is produced in, let's say, Brazil and sold to a person or a business in the US, that counts as an export for Brazil and as an import for the US. In 2014, Americans imported over $2 trillion worth of stuff like oil, cars, and clothing from countries all over the world. And we do import a lot of things from China, but in terms of both imports and exports, our largest trading partner is not China, it's Canada. The US and Canada trade over $600 billion worth of goods and services each year. In fact, the United States is the world's second largest exporter. It sells high-tech things like pharmaceuticals, jet turbines, generators, and aircraft to countries all over the world, as well as bulk commodities like corn, oil, and cotton.
Why does the U.S. import nearly all of its clothing? Why can't we clothe ourselves? Because they focus on other things that they're better at producing. The U.S. buys clothes from other countries because we can get them cheaper than if we made them here. No country in recent decades has achieved sustained improvements in living standards without open trade with the rest of the world. Countries like Cuba, Venezuela, Zimbabwe, and Iran that are voluntarily or involuntarily cut off from the world remain less economically developed than they could be. On the other hand, countries that have opened their doors to trade, like Japan and Taiwan, or more recently China and India, have seen massive improvements in their standards of living.
Boosting your immune system, controlling your blood pressure, and increasing stamina. This herbal remedy began hundreds of years ago. Ginseng users not only claim it has medicinal benefits, it's been around for generations, harvested for trade in the U.S. since the mid-1700s. Kirk Bauman of Bauman Farms in central Wisconsin has been farming ginseng since 1978. His number one client? China.
The Chinese value the Wisconsin brand ginseng highly. It's the most sought after.
But trading fears hang heavy over this farmer's head.
Are you getting the support you need from politicians?
Right now, that's in question. What we're doing now, we're supported just fine. In the future, I'm concerned about what trade policies will be put into place.
So specialization makes people more productive. Assume that John can produce either pizza or t-shirts. If he's way better at producing pizza, then he should specialize in making pizza and then trade with someone else like Hank, who's way better at making t-shirts. Everyone knows Hank's better at making t-shirts, right? With trade, each of them can end up with more pizza and shirts than if they tried to make them on their own.
Individuals and countries should specialize in producing things in which they have a comparative advantage, and then trade with other countries that specialize in something else. This trade is mutually beneficial.
Certain places around the world are better at making certain things, and to create efficiency in the global economy, one nation devotes its resources to the things that it's good at and exchanges those things for the things that another nation is good at or is better at. So the United States is really good at growing corn, and we ship a lot of corn to Mexico. In turn, the United States buys a lot of avocados in the other direction.
And often, that arrangement works out really well.
Free trade agreements, or FTAs, make it easier and cheaper for U.S. companies to export their goods and services while creating jobs and boosting the economy. Critics argue such pacts can have the opposite effect, taking jobs from U.S. workers and shipping them overseas.
Mexican labor is cheaper. But before NAFTA, that really didn't matter. By the time a Mexican product made it across the border, it'd be slapped with a tax. So Mexican manufacturers were never really a threat. And certain industries in the US were heavily protected by taxes. Like, for example,
shoe manufacturers at that time had something like 15 to 17% tariffs on their product. So, that made it, 17% more expensive to get the product from Mexico. As a result of NAFTA, those tariffs went down all the way to zero over 10 years. And that meant that it was much less appealing to do manufacturing of that good in the United States. And those jobs basically disappeared.
And that's the story we're familiar with by now. Cheaper Mexican labor means the jobs go to Mexico. But changes like that affected more than just the manufacturing jobs.
It was not only the people who worked in the factories that lost their jobs, but even the people surrounding them. So if you worked in a coffee shop, or if you worked in a department store in a town that relied on that shoe manufacturer, you would also lose your job.
That's how an entire shoe manufacturing town can be devastated by NAFTA. On balance, Americans probably saved money because of it, and they got stuff that they wouldn't have had otherwise. And some people lost their jobs. Was it worth it?
We have a history of one-sided trade agreements where our country and our people are placed at a distinct disadvantage. Entire industries have been wiped out and shipped overseas as a byproduct of these agreements. Companies, cities, and regions of our country have been severely damaged.
The United States trade deficit with all of its trading partners was $500 billion in 2016. That's the equivalent of nearly 3% of the U.S. economy. Is that trade deficit a problem? First, what is a trade deficit? A trade deficit happens when a country's imports of goods and services exceed its exports of goods and services. In other words, when a country buys more from the rest of the world than it sells, the country incurs a trade deficit.
$566 billion, America's current trade deficit with the rest of the world. President Trump calls it a disaster, proposing protectionist trade measures to fix the imbalance. But is a multi-billion-dollar trade gap always a bad thing? A trade deficit reflects the balance of trade, meaning the difference in value between a country's exports and imports. A nation has a deficit if it imports more than it exports. And in 2017, America bought $810 billion more total goods than it sold. Things like clothes, electronics, auto parts. Trump says that is a problem.
Yet in last year's 3 presidential debates, the word automation never came up. And with credible projections now forecasting that our growing use of robots, self-driving vehicles, and other automated machinery will eliminate 40% of all jobs in the U.S. by 2030, futurists, labor market analysts, and leading CEOs have begun asking what will become of all those workers displaced by technology.
There is fear that robots will eliminate jobs.
According to McKinsey, about half of the work tasks globally can be automated with currently demonstrated technology. According to MIT professor Eric Brynjolfsson, the economy now needs to adapt.
What we need to be looking now is more fundamental restructuring of the economy. As robots and other technologies come online, there's some big tectonic changes in the kind of skills that are needed in the labor force, the types of organizations, the types of regulations. Technology is a tool. It can be used to create more job losses, and many companies and people are doing that. It can be used to create new jobs. And the way that we respond is going to make all the difference.
So a lot of people would, oh no, making the robots is going to create lots of jobs. So, and they'll displace workers, but there'll be new jobs for them. Banking, there's going to be a big loss of jobs.
Right, that's exactly it. And what we really wanted to do with this was show that every single area of the financial industries, the financial services industry, is going to be affected by this. I mean, whether you're in the buy side or you're in the sell side, if you're an asset manager, a trader, an analyst, this is something that's really going to affect you.
In the 90s, consumers' emotional ties to music equaled big money. No one batted an eye when Puff Daddy's record label made 2 music videos featuring elaborate helicopter chases in consecutive years.
The CD boom was from '84 to 2000. You actually had to drive your car to the Tower Records and buy a CD for $18 to get the one song you liked. And so that was a good model. It made the industry tons and tons of cash.
In 1998, at Northeastern University, a freshman, Sean Fanning, began developing a computer program called Napster in his dorm room. It was one of the first large-scale peer-to-peer file-sharing programs. It allowed users to access music files stored on the hard drives of fellow Napster users.
Very soon afterwards, Napster really took hold in the public's consciousness, and the consumer realized that they could get the music that they wanted to hear for free.
It was on college campuses with high-speed internet that Napster really took off in the fall of '99.
So how many MP3s do you have on your computer? About 600.
Maybe like 100 or something.
6,000 or 7,000.
Napster.
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 It's called file sharing, seen by some as the wave of the future.
Ladies and gentlemen, creator of Napster, Sean Fanning.
When I first heard about Napster, I recall my impression having 2 different elements. One being, this is incredible, it's revolutionary, and things will never be the same again in the music industry. And the other being, this is going to destroy the recording industry.
Blockbuster Video is no more.
Borders is going into liquidation.
Music was the first industry that really had to confront the idea of free content. Music was at the forefront of it, whether it liked it or not.
how does this sound? A paycheck every month, even if you do not have a job. It is called Universal Basic Income, and it's gaining in popularity as a concept for the not-too-distant future.
Now it's time for our generation to define a new social contract.
At Harvard last month, Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg endorsed the concept of a universal basic income, a guaranteed wage for some or all Americans to be means-tested or limited to the losers in the emerging new economy of the digital age.
We should explore ideas like universal basic income to make sure that everyone has a cushion to try new ideas.
Tesla CEO Elon Musk told a forum in Dubai 12 to 15% of the human workforce will be rendered obsolete within 20 years.
This is going to be a massive social challenge. And I think ultimately we will have to have some kind of universal basic income. I don't think we're going to have a choice.
Critics argue a guaranteed income is not only socialist, but defeatist.
The challenge, I think, for public policy is to make sure that workers are equipped to work in the new kinds of jobs that the economy is creating, to make sure that workers are supported in their aspirations to work.
Conceptually, we have to actually value work, and we have to say it's not just about consumption and how much we all get to consume and how cheap stuff is. We actually have to realize that people having work is what's most important to them. And then
well, wait a second. Paying everybody off with $3 grand a month won't be the answer?
No, it's a disaster. It's a great answer for the folks who are doing really well. The funny thing is, the higher up the income ladder you go, the more people say, oh, not everyone needs a job, we can send them money. You go down to the bottom end of the ladder, that's where you find the people who say, no, we don't just want money, we want the jobs, because they understand how critical work is, not just to their own satisfaction, their own lives, to their families, to their communities. And if we don't focus on that, if we just say, oh, we'll grow the pie, what they say, and
right.
we'll just send everyone a piece, right? You don't have to bake your own pie, we'll just give you a slice. That's not what people want, and that's not a model for a good society.
Hi, Sophia. How are you?
Hi there. Everything is going extremely well.
Do you like talking with me?
Yes. Talking to people is my primary function.
We are 41 million people strong in this country. 41 million, that is a country. That is a country like Argentina, that is a country like Spain. We, in 2012, will be spending $1 trillion. That's the power that we have. Now, you can't tell me that with 41 million people united with $1 trillion, we can't get what we need from this government.
Our people didn't give up. They looked
to their own institutions, their churches. Out of those churches, they will build schools, they will build insurance companies, they will build banks.
These success stories were a byproduct of a system of laws that forced black people to live in their own world.
Segregation was good for entrepreneurs because, number one, white funeral homes didn't bury blacks. White barbers didn't cut black hair. Okay? So blacks control the taxi industry, going through. So, and what I'm really trying to do is remind blacks of the values we once had that we don't have today.
And before integration, blacks had their own communities. They had their own resources. They had their own businesses all over this country. And you young people here today, you don't know it, but I'm telling you, black folk had viable, competitive communities before integration. And in North Carolina, where I grew up, my family was the only family that had a part ownership in the only black bus line in the entire United States. We didn't have a bus line with 3 or 4 buses. We had the biggest bus line in the state, and the only one in America for blacks. We had over 500 buses. We serviced the black neighborhoods and the white neighborhoods. We had our own theaters. We had the Lafayette, the Lincoln Theater chain all over America. We had film companies in Jacksonville, Florida. Norman Productions in Jacksonville made black westerns and black love romance films. We had a black studio in Chicago and a black studio here in Hollywood called Hollywood Productions. It was black owned. We made our own films. We had mattress factories, we had broom factories, we had blacks in the oil drilling companies. We had a black railroad line in Jacksonville, Florida. We had another black railroad company in Oklahoma.
A lot of these millionaire families, these families that got more in their first million in the generally 1880s, 1890s. For example, the mansion that's on the cover of the book is the home of Alonzo Herndon, who was the first black millionaire in Atlanta. And he made his first million in the late 1880s. And the Herndon home, his home is still standing today, and it's now a museum in Atlanta. But he founded Atlanta Life Insurance Company, which is still in existence today. And he was very similar to a lot of the millionaires during the 1880s and 1890s, that each one of them had founded businesses that thrived primarily because of segregation. And as an example, I give you, each one of these cities had a black insurance company, a black bank, a black funeral home. There were black businesses because at that time the white banks would not loan money to black families, the white insurance companies would not insure black property, the white funeral homes would not accept black bodies. So there were certain families that were the black banking family in each city. So whether you're in Memphis or Chicago or Atlanta or Washington, there were families that had supported the black community in that way by starting these businesses.
Statism is necessary to keep a racial minority oppressed. Under capitalism, most enterprising members of a minority group can overcome virtually any obstacle.
Just 100 years after Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation that freed the slaves, 200,000 people converge on the nation's capital to rally for civil rights. They come by train, they come by bus and by air. They come from the north, the south, the east and west. They come united in one cause, to urge Congress to pass a civil rights bill to end forever the blight of racial inequity.
Desegregation means just stop the government from using its power and resources to deprive you. And what most blacks thought they were getting was assimilation. Assimilation means they wanted to move in, intermarry with whites, and disappear, just like the Asians and Hispanics can do. Whites never gave you assimilation. They gave you integration. Integration is another something behind the counter. Integration is a weaker form of segregation. Now you're weaker than you ever were. Remember I told you about the strong will win, the weak will suffer, the majority will win? Integration means that you have now been scattered into pieces. You have no power. Power doesn't come from individuals, it comes from the group. You all should never do anything as individuals. Do it as a group. Okay? When you integrate, that means you become a guest. Integration means black people become G-U-E-S-T-S. You're a guest. You're a guest in everything everybody else owns and controls. You're a guest in their hotels, their restaurants, their airlines, their neighborhoods, their schools. You don't own anything in America because you volunteered to become guests. Now we have no studios, no distribution system, and no theaters. And what I'm telling you all is you're going backwards. What put us out of business was not Duke Powell, who we put out of business. What put us out of business was integration. Because when Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks integrated the buses down in Montgomery, and black folk wanted to sit on the front of the bus. When it got to North Carolina, the people in North Carolina, the blacks said, we want to sit on the front of the white buses too. And we said, but we don't have any white buses up here. They said, well, get some so we can sit on the front of them. And so we went out of business. We had black cab companies. We had 2 black cab companies, the Harris and Camel City cab companies. They went out of business. You know why? Blacks didn't want to ride in the black cabs anymore. They want to ride in the white cabs. They wanted to ride in the yellow cab and the bluebird cab. And now we have nothing in the entire United States because integration took it away from us. The other thing the integration does for you, you got to understand, integration also is draining your capital. All your money now is moving out of your community into the white community.
When integration came, back to the early discussion I had with you, integration came, they extracted everything out of the black community. When they integrated, for the first time since slavery, whites had an opportunity to penetrate the black community. We have communities then.
And what is also, I guess, maybe ironic is that it was actually integration that diluted some of the wealth of these families, because then ultimately there were choices for where the black community was going to spend its money, whether for banking or insurance or funeral homes or whatever the business might happen to be.
If we look at ourselves as a nation, the African American nation must do what all African nations must do. We must capture our own internal resources. We must gain control of our own internal markets. We must trade within ourselves as a people and a group and generate wealth within our own nation as a means of counterbalancing our dependence upon Europeans and upon the white nation itself. But in order to do this, we must have a nation consciousness. We must now organize and relate to ourselves as a nation of people. If we look at our relationship to Koreans, to Dominicans, to other groups, we'll see the same relationship, where those groups can enter into the African American nation, set up shop, ship out its wealth day by day and night by night, and yet the African American entrepreneurial nation is not permitted to set up shop in their midst, is not permitted to carry wealth from their nations. And they then grow fat on the surplus that they gain from the African American nation. This means then that if we think of ourselves as a nation, we must protect our internal markets from the intrusion of outsiders.
Microsoft is a truly unique company. In the past 6 months, the search committee and the entire board of directors has driven a thorough and comprehensive process to find the best possible CEO for Microsoft. Well, Sunday was a really, really big day in Seattle. And it didn't have anything to do with the Seahawks. Because on Sunday morning, our board met and unanimously appointed Satya our next CEO.
The fight today is not for equal rights. It's not for civil rights anymore. It's for equal economic empowerment.
All my life, I've been trying to answer one question.
Where black folk internationally make up about 25% of the world's population, and out of over $300 trillion worth of wealth, black folk own and control less than 1/2 of 1% of the world's wealth. And it's not social integration, not civil rights that determines your opportunities, your equal opportunities, or your competitiveness. It's what you own and control in terms of vital resources. That's what determines what you're going to get in this world.
Every social problem black people have can be traced back to our lack of business ownership. Because the people who run business run the world.
Because white supremacy means just that, white supremacy. You might be the football players, but we own the team. You might be the basketball player, but we run the games. You might be the scientist and the doctor, but we control the hospitals that you work for.
Being a worker is not a path to prosperity. Being a worker is simply a path to more work. Every generation of black children are born into generational poverty. The reason for this is because for over half a century, our social and political leaders have made a relentless push for jobs when we should have made a relentless push for businesses. Instead of complaining about the economy, we should have built our own.
We're where we are today because we have the entrepreneurial spirit has been taken away from us.
Pre-1960, most African Americans were Republicans. After Martin Luther King was freed from jail by John F. Kennedy, the African American vote has gone Democratic. What exactly did we get exchanged for our 95% Democratic swaying vote? We gave up 3-to-1 odds in abortion.
14 million black babies have died since 1973.
Dependent on welfare systems.
They begin to take young women and they begin to tell the young women, well, we will give you money, you just stay home. But what if I want to get married? You lose your benefits.
When you remove the black man out of the house, the likelihood of the young black men going to jail increases by 60%. This is what this party has given on a platter to African Americans. Sometimes you can't tell the difference between now and 200 years ago. And we, by 95%, support this.
What broke down in black America is just a picture of what's breaking down in the rest of society.
The slippery slope of leftist progressivism that is taking place in America today.
What the liberal Democrats have in mind is to have the government become our God through entitlement programs that shackles people to a system of being dependent.
37 years of reporting what the state of black America is, and really now taking a 50-year snapshot. Why was this report more important than any that you've done in the past?
I think because it's a chance to go back to 1963, the year when the Civil Rights Act was introduced into Congress by President Kennedy, and then come all the way to 2013 with President Obama in the White House and say, how far have we come. On the other hand, the other side of the coin is that the level of violence, the level of economic disparity, the unemployment rate, the joblessness rate are far too high, and in many respects, the economic comparisons haven't changed markedly in that 50-year period. In many respects, the economic comparisons haven't changed markedly in that 50-year period.
So, all right, listen. A lot of black people know me. And their biggest problem with me is that I don't support black businesses. And when I say this is like a hate crime. Oh, you don't support black businesses? No, I don't. Then they say shit like, well, that means you don't like black people. Sure I do, sugar. But all black businesses are not professional enough for me. And I ain't spending money on non-professionalism just because your skin is black.
I have to say, as of this day, that my dollar is not going to go into a black man's hand. That for now, all black businesses are suspended until further notice. Until you niggas get your motherfucking act right.
I know people are going to be mad and I'm going to get some backlash from this video, and I'm fine with that because I love a healthy debate. And I'll even take part in an unhealthy debate in a healthy way. So, yeah, it's not really about black business. It's about good business and knowing business and being knowledgeable in your industry and, you know, those sorts of things. You got to get yourself out there for me to know that you exist. And then you get the support. That's why people don't support black business.
Missouri shooting is inspiring a new national movement. It's called Blackout Monday. And new at 5, Amy Hawley found it's a new kind of protest, which is also happening here in Kansas City.
I got out of school at 2:48 and had to be at work at 3:30 every day. Yeah, it was fun. I was the only kid in school that had money in my pocket.
Today, Leon's Thriftway manager hoped to make a little more money than usual. A national anonymous effort called Blackout Monday asked people across the nation to buy at only black-owned and operated stores today. Leon's is the city's oldest black-owned grocery store. The owner's grandson says people should support those who have supported the black community in days of struggle.
He was so loyal to his people that he chose to stay here so they will have a grocery store in this community, supporting each other, I mean, like we used to. Just showing that we care about each other.
And African-American owned and operated businesses we talked to today said the Blackout Monday effort did help them cook up new business. More solidarity means more money means more power.
Yes, it has. Our Mondays are typically busy, but today has been busier.
I think it's a great movement.
But he thinks people should support what they love all year around, not necessarily because of an issue he calls divisive and racial.
I'm going to support business if they're doing good business regardless of color. I think it's something that we should do regardless of Ferguson.
In Kansas City, Amy Hawley, 41 Action News.
like let's take Detroit, Michigan, and the recent reports from the Pew Foundation and U.S. Census. They showed them pretty clearly that they ranked all the cities, urban cities in the United States. The 10 poorest cities ranked 3 months ago in the entire United States. The 10 poorest cities, the 10 most dangerous cities, with the highest home foreclosure rates, with the highest high school dropout rates, with the highest imprisonment rates. Guess what they were? Cities where black folk are the majority populations. Detroit led the list in every category. In a city that's 85 to 90% black, and Arabs own 90% of the businesses.
Metro Foodland. Oh, yeah. Hi, I'm Reverend Wendell Anthony. Welcome to Metro Foodland, one of Detroit's best kept secrets. Let's start shopping right now.
Metro Foodland, it's your one-stop grocery mart with lottery tickets, authorized bill paying, dairy, quality meats, a full-service deli, mouth-watering baked goods, and fresh fruit and vegetables daily.
Let Metro Foodland be your homeland. Shop in Detroit. Metro Foodland, oh yeah, we got what you need.
Recording now.
Okay, we have just arrived. Hello, how you doing? We just arrived at Metro Foodland in support of Blackout Monday, encouraging black families to promote and build black business awareness. And in this effort, we've come all the way out here from Warren, Michigan, that's 14 miles away, to come out here and support Detroit's one and only full-service grocery black-owned store, which makes us Detroiters very proud because there's only 3 cities standing in America today that is a full grocery black-owned store. Want to show off the? Are you the meat guy or the bakery guy?
I don't know, depending on what you're doing.
Well, we here in support of the Blackout Monday to promote black households to patronize black-owned businesses.
Unfortunately, sweetie, you're in the wrong place.
What do you mean?
It's no longer black-owned. It's no longer black-owned. It's no longer black-owned.
James Hook doesn't own this anymore? Metro Foodland, one of the last standing, sold to Chaldeans. When you really think about it, Chaldeans are the only ones making that big money in the D. They got all the Coney Islands, they got all the liquor stores, they got all the dry cleaners. The Chaldeans is making mad money in the D. We need to change that demographic. Peace.
I'm here in Greektown. I'm here where the beautiful Greektown Casino is. Well, the best thing I like about Greektown is that the food. You know, I think I'm a food connoisseur myself. I love going places to eat. I love to maybe go ahead, go somewhere and get a drink with my friends and hang out. It's a really good place, a nice place to hang out. It's very vivid. The lights is beautiful. Greektown is very nice.
Greektown, I mean, I love Greektown, man. It's cool. The atmosphere real nice down here.
I'm not really a big time gambler, but you know, the club scene down here is real nice. I mean, Greektown got its own vibe. You know, it's real mellow down here. You don't get so much of the riffraff, a lot of the violence, all of the club bangers. You know, you get more so people just coming out to have a good time.
Everybody has their own talent. When you're walking down Monroe Street, you see different artists, whether it's music, whether it's singing, whether it's the drums. You see different things.
Greektown is crazy. Greektown get crazy at nighttime. I mean, it's one of those places you come after the club, you know what I'm saying? You leave the club, if you want to still get your party on, you're going to go ahead and go to Greektown and you're going to turn it up, you know what I'm saying? You go in there, you can make you a couple dollars. If you ain't from the city, if you is from the city, however it go, I mean, you got to get down here at some point. Detroit, I love you. Eastside, I love you.
Detroit, I love you.
Detroit, I love you, baby.
I love Detroit. See y'all later.
As we all know, Congress recently approved paying over $1 trillion to African Americans as reparations for slavery. Well, today, the first checks were sent out. Wendy Mullen is standing by live in Queens with more. Wendy?
Thanks, Chuck. We're standing here in front of the Olympic Liquor Store in Queens, where scores of African Americans have been lined up for hours.
Well, these checks aren't just affecting things on Beach Street. Wall Street is having a big day as well. Our financial correspondent, Michael Peterson, is there. Michael, what's happening?
Chuck, a lot of activity, as you can imagine, here on the market. These people are spending money like hotcakes. Cadillac announced that they sold 3 million Escalade trucks this afternoon alone. It's incredible, Chuck. These people just seem to be breaking their necks to give this money right back to us. These people just seem to be breaking their necks to give this money right back to us. These people just seem to be breaking their necks to give this money right back to us. Folks, I am happy to report that the recession is now officially over, and we have nobody to thank but all these black people with their taste for expensive clothes, fancy cars, and of course, gaudy jewelry.
To think about how we capture that spend, capitalize on it, and grow it in a strategic way in our commercial corridors and within our neighborhoods. I think we have tremendous potential.
So, Carla, I want you to give us briefly your story, because it's a remarkable story. You started a big company, went on your own, the downturn came, you sort of lost it all, and then you came back. Tell us that story.
Absolutely. I did 18 years in corporate America and just didn't find the right space for me. So in 2000, I started my own business and had success selling large power equipment for 9 years.
every time we try to go down the capitalistic route, that we've been unsuccessful in that. So we need to stop trying to live in a fantasy world like capitalism is actually going to free our people.
I don't think that Black people can survive in a capitalist social construct. If we review the beginnings of capitalism, which was based on the enslavement of African people, capitalism in essence is you get the most money from doing the least amount of work.
I always try to make light of certain situations to try to ease people's minds into things. But until y'all start studying what capitalism is and what it does to Black people, don't fucking mention my name.
One of the reasons we're struggling right now as Black people is because we're trying to be Black capitalists. And capitalism is not in cultural alignment with who we are as a people.
The Russian Revolution erupted in 1917. As World War I raged, a small group of communists seized power in the name of the working class, proclaiming a radiant new society based on socialism, justice, and equality. The revolution inspired a small group of American radicals.
The tremendous event in our lives then was the Russian Revolution. The feeling was it was only a matter of time before the revolution would sweep all through Western Europe and then also come to the United States.
The Black elite, ministers, elites, editors, businessmen, preached an anti-union gospel and cautioned Black workers to not bite the hand that fed them, that is, the employers who hired them into unskilled or menial jobs.
The Comintern directed the American Party to champion the cause of African Americans.
And the Comintern make a declaration in 1928 that we must respond to the Negro question first in the United States.
Мне не давали руки. Это потому, что я негр.
Инструментальщик Роберт Робинсон избран депутатом Московского совета.
African Americans who came to work in Russian factories were warmly welcomed.
One of the core principles was that Marxism is going to eliminate racism because racism is a byproduct of capitalism. One of the core principles was that Marxism is going to eliminate racism because racism is a byproduct of capitalism. Because racism is a byproduct of capitalism, and allowing those people to be demonized and to be called a different race, to be called other people.
Capitalism needed racism in order to operate. To explain further, capitalism needed to steal things in order to come into fruition. The racist culture that we have is necessitated by capitalism. We won't get rid of that racist culture until we get rid of capitalism.
Hi, I'm Laura Flanders. Today on the show, a conversation about capitalism and white supremacy. Capitalism and white supremacy with two brilliant minds, Dr. Cornel West and Professor Rick Wolff.
Marx was a German writing about industrialism in 19th century Northern Europe. Is that relevant to people here in the States in the 21st century, especially African American people?
I think it's very relevant. Karl Marx was one of the great prophetic figures of the 19th century because he had an analysis of capitalism that kept track of the precious humanity of working people and poor people.
the post-1960s Marxist intellectuals and politicians zeroed in on poor blacks as their target audience. What was Walter Williams saying that Washington's welfare pimps have seduced people onto the dole?
The role of the Caribbean, people from the Caribbean to our struggle, invaluable. A lot of the people who came from the Caribbean had an anti-imperialist understanding. They had known the national bourgeoisie of their country. In some ways, they had a higher sense of class and so on than maybe native-born did, although native-born also were fighting and militant. But the ideas of Marxism seem to have filtered down to the Caribbean blacks more than here. That's just my guess, but I think that's probably what pretty much happened.
Why is Angela Davis a communist?
Actually, I think I answered that before when we were talking about what a revolutionary is.
Many times the term communist, because I think it's been used by so many different aspects of our society to put down rather than to let people try to understand. You know, everybody shuns away from it. It's like it's a disease or something like that.
But in the meantime, thousands of people joined the Communist Party, particularly African Americans. I can tell you, in a weekend in Chicago, students came from Ohio, Illinois, Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, so forth. 70 African Americans came to hear Henry Winston in a church on the south side of Chicago. I made a talk on the youth question, and he made a talk on the fight against racism. That day, we recruited 70 new members to the Communist Party, young, black students, beautiful young people who came into the party. And that was typical. The whole Angela movement had created a whole network of new people coming to the party. It was a great leap in terms of our growth and influence in the African American community.
The black community may not have agreed with communism, may not even have known what it was, but they understood if people were fighting racism. That's where the support came. If the government was against you, you must be doing something right.
The role of the Communist Party in breaking the color bar in baseball. Thanks for raising that, Bernie. I appreciate that. It was a great thing. People went to the games with signs. Trade unions endorsed the idea. Union members came and stood up and expressed their point of view, showing their signs about the need to integrate baseball. And then he said, well, we got to find a Negro who was acceptable and all that. And they chose Jackie Robinson, who came from California, college kid, smart, and a terrific player. And he was the first to go on the Dodgers. And the rest is history. But it actually was the Young Communist League and the Communist Party and the Communist Press that led that fight.
Black patriarch